this generation has, they're kind of a blank slate. And I think the possibility of creating persuasive communities, as I've mentioned before, whether that's a local faith community, whether that is a business environment, how do we create a workforce that is persuaded that our work is actually doing the kind of good that we say that it's doing, that they really sort of see the line between our intent and our action and the outcomes of our
Young
work.
people are looking for a way through the toughest things that we face as human beings, be that war, conflict, health, job loss, mental health. We need to give people the tools to take the venom out of that.
They're not as cynical as previous generations have been, at least in the early going so far. And they really want to try to find some solutions to these deeper problems that they see in society.
Welcome to this latest episode of Commscast with Jersey Road. My name is Liam Flint, Marketing and Communications Officer at Jersey Road. Delighted to say I'm joined by Managing Director Gareth Russell. Gareth, welcome again.
Thank you, Liam.
New episode.
Yeah.
And this is part 2. So we're doing a 2-piece on reaching new audiences. So we've already spoken this morning, and now we are very pleased to be joined by our guest, David Kinnaman, who is CEO of Barna Group over in the States. He's joining us remotely. David, great to have your time. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here, Liam. Good to see you, Gareth.
Yeah, good to see you too, mate.
Absolute pleasure. And we're going to be, David, diving into reaching the younger generation, which I know you at Barna Group have done a lot of research in. You've given a lot of time and energy into that. So we're really excited to pick your brains on that. But Gareth, we really enjoy working and being associated with Barna, don't we? And especially David.
Well,
say some nice things about him.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, actually, I think David and I are, at the risk of this sounding like the wrong way, celebrating our 20th anniversary. Last year, I think we celebrated our 20th anniversary of being friends. So we, when I was a wee
lad, when you were a wee lad,
when I was a young man, I actually did an internship with Barna in Ventura, California, and I was very blessed to get to know David at that point and his family, and we've known each other since then. And yeah, over the last few years, we've had the opportunity to work on a number of projects together as Barna and Jersey Road, and it's been great just seeing how Barna's influence, not only in the States but across the world, has grown in that time as well. So yeah, excited for what we're going to be talking about today.
David, just for starters, could you give us a bit of a pitch of what Barna does for those who haven't come across Barna? What do you specialize in? What is your role? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so the company really focuses on social research to understand people's opinions, attitudes, perspectives, beliefs, behaviors, sort of anything that you can ask someone a question about. Then that's our domain. And business is good because people love to give their opinions on all sorts of topics. And it's interesting what people will tell you and what they'll talk about and what they'll admit to and what they'll be open about, with the promise of anonymity in a survey research exercise. I actually think it's a really sacred trust that people tell us things about their loneliness or their addictions or their challenges and also their hopes and dreams. And so, it's for us a chance to come alongside leaders by helping to amplify the voice of someone else, someone you're trying to get to know, whether it's a younger person, a millennial or Gen Z, or if it is a pastor or a minister. We've had a chance of, I think, being one of the most prolific companies in interviewing leaders of faith, and starting to help explain the experience of what it's like to be a pastor or a spiritual leader. And then just broadly, just talking to different populations, whether it's adults or teenagers around the world or whatever it may be. And it's a great pleasure. We like I said, sort of have this chance of coming alongside people and the moments that lead them to the time when we get 15 minutes of their schedule, and they tell us that they're struggling, or they identify as Christian but they never pray or they never go to church. And so it's a great privilege to sort of amplify someone else's voice and to sort of understand a little bit more about what might be happening in terms of social trends.
And Gareth, we've really benefited, haven't we, from the insights that Barna have put out there. We've seen their reports, and it's such a key listening tool, isn't it, for someone like Barna to take that initiative and just to pump out there. This is what people are thinking, different audiences, different demographics, and it's been really informative for what we're doing as Jersey Road.
Yeah, I mean, Barna are a market leader in this space and have been for decades. First of all, I'd also like to say, David, thank you for saying Gen Z. I'm translating in your head. Liam's been saying Gen Z, so he's going to be speaking American. You're going to be speaking British. Yeah, I think particularly in this space of younger generations and that intersection between faith and culture, it's Barna have been the leader in this space, and as I say, not just in the States but globally as well. Dave, I think it'd be interesting just to start because we're going to be talking a lot about, I'm going to say Gen Z. Let's just say Gen Z for the purposes of this call.
Deal.
Yeah. I remember you doing a talk a while back, and you talked about I think it was actually millennials being the first global teenager, and I'm assuming that kind of as the next generations come in, that's kind of become even more the case. Can you just explain a bit about what that means to be a global teenager and how that's changed from previous generations?
Well, the connection through technology is really a profound revolution in human history, and you don't have to listen to us talk about that to know that may be the case. The acceleration of information and technology and connection. I mean, it's really remarkable how much the digital revolution, just like the revolution that electrification or television or other forms of communication have had, but this has had a very in particular profound impact on societies. And so as a result, younger people who are born and sort of had smartphones as one of their primary smartphones or some sort of digital technology as one of their primary means of expression and connection, have created a kind of global culture, a global generational culture. And a couple of ways to think about that in a research study that we called the Connected Generation, which looked at millennials, we found that very often young adults were more like other young adults across various languages and cultural contexts, more than they were like older adults in their own country or in their own faith tradition. And very similar kind of findings with the teenage study that we just did. So we've really done two major global studies, one of millennials and one of Gen Z, one called the Connected Generation and one called the Open Generation. And human nature doesn't change, but the technologies have changed. And I think a way to sort of zoom back on that and understand the sort of the impact of that is that because technology connects us to the world, there is this, if you've heard of TED Talks, undoubtedly. And so TED actually stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And they are particularly sort of new value sets. Technology, there's always been technology in human history, but you look at the power of technology today, and entertainment, the last 100 years of music and movies and sort of television and now streamed entertainment, video gaming, all the sort of spaces of entertainment today, and then design. And those are three values that I think define the way younger generations sort of see and interpret the world. There's just a greater number of just sheer hours that young people around the planet have consumed of the values that come through technology, entertainment, and design. And even though technology itself is sort of value neutral, they sort of, there's a really great piece of sort of technological philosophy by the name of Neil Postman, who basically says, the medium is the message. And so technology does carry a certain sort of ideal in it, that, immediacy and connection and,
right,
sort of the like, you can always answer the question that is in your brain. And so I think those are some of the reasons that this generation is different. We're raising young people and we're working in a context that is a very different context than it was 20 years ago, and certainly 40 years ago, 20 years ago when we met, and 40 years ago when this company was started. And again, those are big numbers, 20 years, 40 years, but it also sort of is just a tiny blink in human history. And yet we've seen such a huge set of changes. And so one example of this is that in the past, people would have sort of decided about their faith on the basis of what their parents and grandparents and their tribe would have thought. They would have sort of inherited a kind of Jesus, let's say, in the case of Christian belief and practice, really from their immediate family. And that still has a huge shaping influence, but it's much more diminished now because people have all of these other sort of places to go find information and sort of other influences. So it's sort of the gospel according to YouTube, the gospel according to TikTok, and there are these different ways that people are thinking about and perceiving the nature of reality, and whether Jesus was an actual human being or not, or did he really say those kinds of things that he's credited as saying. And so there's a really interesting moment for us when the TED values are really the lingua franca, the language of the day, the chief values of what it means to live a meaningful life. Whether that's right or wrong, that's how younger generations are they're living in that cultural milieu.
Yeah. And just from a lot of the people who are watching this will be comms people, so they'll be maybe working for not-for-profits, maybe working for corporate organizations, but they're going to be comms people. Does this idea of the global teenager, or the global, whether that's a millennial or Gen Z, does that mean that when they communicate, it simplifies the communication because they can communicate to a millennial in Bangkok and a millennial in Boston in the same way, and it'll be received in the same way and be as effective? Or is it not quite as simple as that?
I think in general that is true, that there is an ease of communication, that if you can crack the code for a young person in one context, you will be very close for a young person in another context. But I think there's a lot more to it as well in terms of what it is you're trying to persuade someone about. I actually think some of the, to get right into it, I think some of the global conflicts that we're having today, whether in the Middle East and Israel and Gaza, or in Ukraine, it's and many other kind of examples, there's a real sense in which participants in these conflicts are understanding the need for winning the persuasive battle in these spaces. So, I mean, just like, I'm sure this is the case in the UK, but it's certainly the case in the US, where I have more, sort of social research at the ready. And, younger generations are night and day different in their support for Palestinians, and then for their support for Israel, whereas older generations are just night and day much more likely to support the cause of Israel. I realize it's not a zero-sum game where you support one, you can't support the other, but there's just a real interesting way in which the algorithms and the stories on TikTok or in these places, there's sort of maybe a lack of historical thinking that is happening, and there's a sense in which we've kind of lost the opportunity of helping people connect to a larger story. And there's lots of good reasons why there's skepticism and questions and others that are happening, but there's a really good case, what is it that your organization is trying to do in the world? Are you trying to persuade people towards a certain set of actions? For those of us in Christian ministry, we're obviously hoping to persuade people towards a transformed life in Christ, and not just sort of ticking the box about a cause they care about. We actually want them to be able to see both sides. In fact, that sort of the nature of human conflict, or the nature of the human soul, is not a zero-sum game, that there is these deep parts of our hearts and minds and souls that God himself wants to put back together. But I think there's a lot of good questions around how do we go about living in this new persuasive environment? I think this is maybe the central theme I would just double click on for our viewers and listeners, which is we're living in a really interesting and fun and exciting and sort of no holds barred, persuasive community. Like we're trying to build new persuasive communities, new tools for what it means to persuade. What are our opportunities to persuade? What are the limits, especially now in the age of AI? What is the boundaries of truth and error, of right and wrong, in terms of how we persuade and move human hearts and minds. And at the end of the day, how are we going to do this both for efficient work, for whether that's fundraising or market share or sales, or moving the needle on some cause that we care about. But at the end of the day, I think PR, I think comms, I think social research, we're actually in a really interesting and fun time where we get to sort of try some things and then go back to the laboratory and really, like, how can we help people find the best versions of themselves? How can we help human societies tell deeper and better stories? Part of the reason younger generations are reacting to the simple pro-Israel message is that they realize there's a deeper, longer story. Some of the reasons that people are sort of reacting against sort of Hamas or sort of the plight of the Palestinians, they realize there's a deeper, longer story. And I think we have a much bigger appetite as human beings for understanding the complexities of those stories, but our tools have been truncating these messages into smaller and smaller 15-second videos or whatever,
right?
And helping people to really understand that these tools of persuasion, the science of human persuasion and communication, it's about to get just it's going to be the wild, wild west. And so what do we do? What do we do to actually lead this industry in a meaningful way towards the best version of what communication and PR and messaging and media. I mean, it's going to be a really fun and should trouble us a bit about how what the stakes are.
So, David, you mentioned about the fact that millennials are the connected generation, and obviously then when we move to Gen Z, you guys have done another report saying they're the open generation. Could you just give us the headlines there? Because people might be interested to know, okay, we understand the millennial mindset. Talk to me about Gen Z. What are a couple of those headlines that would encourage people, communicators, in what they're like, what their values are, where we can meet with them? What would you say?
Yeah, well, we did this huge study with a range of different partners, World Vision, excuse me. We did a huge study with a range of different partners, Biblica, Alpha, and World Vision, and looked at nearly 25,000 teenagers in more than 25 countries. More than a dozen languages were translated, and it was a real privilege to talk to 13 to 17-year-olds. And originally, we had the great idea of calling it the Global Youth Study, but we actually realized that really one of the key themes was this idea of openness, of spiritual openness, and openness to a lot of things: openness to others, openness to a new way of thinking, openness to spirituality, openness to the Bible, even among non-believers. So we called it the Open Generation, and I think this is part of what is such an exciting and world of possibility when it comes to comms and advertising and media and communication. And again, whatever our work is, I think this is a generation that is quite open. They're open to anything and everything. That has sort of its own downside, because they seem to be much less willing to draw bright lines around the things that are right or wrong, or there's obviously a lot of discussion these days around identity and sort of how we find ourselves. One of the great narratives of our time in the technology, entertainment, and design space is that you look within yourself to discover who you are, and nobody should tell you what that is. And again, I think that's one of those huge sort of philosophical breaks from the past, when we looked to external sources of, like, our families or our communities or our faith or our countries or our places in the world, and we tried to conform in a deeper way. Now, it's interesting because in this era of nonconformity, people are still actually conforming to the very idea of nonconformity, which is a great irony, I think. But I think this generation has they're kind of a blank slate, and I think the possibility of creating persuasive communities, as I've mentioned before, whether that's a local faith community whether that is a business environment. How do we create a workforce that is persuaded that our work is actually doing the kind of good that we say that it's doing? That they really sort of see the line between our intent and our action and the outcomes of our work. So I think this generation, represents a great deal of positivity. They still have a lot of deep questions, and I think we shouldn't sort of brush past that. But they're not as cynical as previous generations have been, at least in the early going so far. And they really want to try to find some solutions to these deeper problems that they see in society, whether that's corruption, poverty, climate change, sort of spiritual poverty. I mean, there's a real sense in which they're looking at these big issues and wanting to find solutions.
David, in most of the new client conversations that we have, organizations are coming to us and saying that we want to engage a younger audience. And then when we say to them, well, what do you mean by a younger audience? They usually mean 50 and 60-year-olds rather than 70 and 80-year-olds. That's not to disparage that. It's actually quite a viable thing because, obviously, a lot of average donor bases tend to be 70-something-year-old women. But when thinking about Gen Z particularly, and maybe millennials as well, from a not-for-profit perspective, what trends are you seeing in terms of them being a viable base for not-for-profits to engage with? You just mentioned some of the issues that they may care about, but how can not-for-profits actually engage them in those issues? Is it just a case of advocacy at this point because they actually don't have any money, or is there more effective ways of them engaging them in the broader work of the not-for-profit?
Well, a couple things. First, the idea that millennials are sort of, living in their parents' basement, or, sort of, they may be deep in debt in some cases, whether that's in the state's school debt or other kind of consumer debt. But there's lots of pockets of, these are now middle-aged people. They're
Right.
They're in their early 40s, the oldest millennials. Many of them have children, and they're an important audience to communicate with. Now, I think the other question behind that question, and they have money, so they're donating. They're donating in some different ways, and they're less like lifetime givers where they're going to just give a monthly, kind of like put it on the credit card and sort of forget about it.
Right.
So you've got to be very active in communicating, as you would with any donor segment, but especially among millennials and Gen Z. But I think you've raised a good question, which is, in what ways does the mission of your organization translate to the questions and concerns that younger generations are really activated for? And again, this will maybe sound like some hard medicine, sort of a tough pill to swallow, but I think we are in an era of whole new wineskins and new models and new mindsets. Many of the organizations of the last 75 years sort of came out of the World War II era, or the last 50 years, sort of really the rise of mass media and radio and television and other forms of sort of Christian publishing and media. And again, I think there's been some really great things that have happened, and many of those organizations will continue on for many decades, and they will certainly find ways of communicating and engaging younger consumers and younger donors and younger audiences. But I think at the same time that we have to sort of refresh our missions and understand how to communicate, like you said, I think there's no shame in finding a 50-year-old when your primary audience is 70-year-olds, because there's plenty of generous 50-year-olds or
Right.
50-year-olds who are, taking care of aging parents or who are dealing with other questions of their young adult children. And so, I mean, I think getting really clear on who your audience is and how you're trying to help move them along in a transformational journey is critical. And then I also think there's some real appetite in our society today for, creating new expressions of what it is that you're doing. So, we've seen some examples of some nonprofits who, and missions and churches and for-profit organizations that create a skunk works inside of their organization, or they literally launch a separate organization because they realize that some of the founding principles of their organization simply won't work in the new TED
Right.
value era.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, many of our organizations, they're oriented around a different kind of mass audience mindset, where kind of one message will sort of move mountains. But this is a different kind of, era of personalization and customization. And some of the groups that are, like, look at the Bible Project, which is based in Portland. And, I don't remember the exact turnover, but I think it's about 30 million is last I had heard. And it's a lot of micro donations because people just love the content. And that's a good example of something that I think is closer to a TED value organization. Technology, it's delivered and, delivered through social media platforms like YouTube. It's entertaining with the hand-drawn, sort of, or the computer-drawn, motion graphic animations. There's a design sensibility that comes straight from the Pacific Northwest, and it's like, so it's got this sense of like people have this deep connection because they're feeling as though this organization is translating. It's really a Bible translation organization. They're translating the scripture visually into a digital age for younger generations. And so people respond, major donors and younger donors. Again, like they're just a great organization. Some good friends are there. And they're just one of, a handful of, I think, organizations that are thinking differently. And it would have been very hard, I think, to incubate that kind of idea within an existing, framework. In fact, I know of a couple of organizations that sort of passed on the idea because it wasn't their mission.
Maybe regretting that now.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a reason why I think new ideas have to have new ground to be planted in. And so it's a little bit of both. And where can we be faithful in the mission and space that we're planted? How can we refresh things? And I heard a great talk recently from Christine Kane, actually, who was talking about wineskins, and she said, we think about the need for new wineskins, which is a metaphor that Jesus uses to talk about kind of models of ministry and sort of mindsets for ministry. And he says no one would take new wine and put them into old wineskins. And her point was like, it's not that old wineskins are bad, because they're still containing wine that is ready to be drank and ready to be consumed. And so, but we need both old wineskins for what God has done and is doing, and we need new wineskins for what God is doing and will do. And I think those are some really important, kind of things. And even if you're not in a faith context, recognizing this, I mean, there's lots and lots of Harvard Business Review and Harvard case studies and other examples of, the need for incubating new ideas before your current innovation is dead. You've got to sort of be ahead of the curve and sort of thinking, with a bit of anticipation in terms of what are some of the business trends that are going to affect you. And it's pretty cool that Jesus was thinking in terms of S curves.
David, can I just pick you up on even the term open generation? Because I think lots of people listening, watching this, will be really encouraged to think that actually the generation that we can often stereotype or think actually they're unreachable. I know you've used the term digital Babylon before to kind of just sum up where we are as a culture. To hear the word and the fact that they're open as a characteristic, often when we're doing client work, we speak to lots of charities, they're always toying between, okay, we're a faith organization, we want to present our message clearly, but we also want to be well received by the media, by just your average person. In a way, do you think then we're overcomplicating things? If this next generation is open, do you think just a clear message, just say it like it is, does what it says on the tin, will do? Or do you think we still need to be clever with it, creative with it? Do charities still need to think outside the box in how to present the faith message behind their values and things like that?
Yeah, I don't want to sort of duck the question by sort of saying it's a both and, but I think that's the way to think about it is, in general, the let's just do it this way. It's just keep it simple. Is like there's no simple answer, and then there's no you've got to have like both the simplicity of communications and the clarity of the message, but also the courage and the ability to sort of think in a personal and personalized way. Again, one of the really key trends to think about is the era of personalization, and one of the reasons that I think churches and especially nonprofits have a hard time with this generation is that young people are younger generations, rising generations are just so used to being these algorithms knowing us better than we know ourselves. So there's a little bit of kind of like when you peel back the layers, you realize that the emperor has just an algorithm, and it's just like it's figuring out that you like puppy videos or whatever, and so it's like it's not all that sophisticated, but it feels like it knows you. And so that's really one of the challenges. One of the phrases one of my mentors talked about, John Ortberg, was, we cannot mass produce disciples. And we can't really mass produce in some way comms. We can't really mass produce PR. There is always the human side of this. And another one of my mentors, Scott Beck, talks about, getting to simplicity on the other side of complexity. So if we're too quick to get to a simple like mantra or tagline or response, we miss the opportunity of really helping people to grapple with what are the complexities of a particular issue, which after all is what this generation is really what we all as human beings are looking for. Like I actually think this generation is hungry for a theology of suffering and lament, because we see so many things that are lamentable and that we suffer through. And for the first time in human history, on our phones, on our devices, we're seeing these profound issues of injustice and of pain, of hunger, of refugee crises, of military operations, of literally, broken bodies. We see, pornography and sexual addiction. It's sort of popularized through these streaming apps in ways that I think are profoundly challenging to young people's ideas of sexuality. We see so few examples of healthy relationships between men and women, on dating and online dating, and just the world of relationships is so unique compared to prior to the internet. So just recognizing that you have to grapple with the complexity of these topics, and then you can maybe hope to get some simple responses or simple ways of bringing clarity to these complex issues. But it has to be a both and I think the great leaders, the great PR experts, the great comms folks of our time, we sort of started our time thinking about like the great opportunity and the great challenges of communications in the age of AI and of TED values. I think great leaders of our time are going to be really masters of this. Like, let's grapple with the complexities of these issues and then get to some simple ways of moving our organizations forward. And if you do just one and not the other, you're going to be a real technocrat with too many technical answers. And if you're just focusing on, sort of simplicity, I think you're going to do more harm than good, because this is not a bumper sticker, world. It's not just like a tagline, take a tagline and call me in the morning kind of thing, right? So it's really important that we build these deep and human responses to the issues of our day. And then leadership requires we say, hey, there is a different way of doing this and a better way to think about these complex issues than what the world has on offer, that you simply look inside and you decide what you want to be. And it turns out you look like everyone else and act like everyone else and think like everyone else, but you think you're being a nonconformist, good for you. But let's actually build better companies, better societies, better families and households. Let's find a way through. I mean, I think in our world today, I think I saw a stat that a majority of the world's population is going to have a new political leader within 12 months. There are
Mm-hmm.
elections around the world in different contexts, and I know there's so many men and women who are leading faithfully in the political space. But what a crazy time when you can see the challenges where politics becomes entertainment, right? Where politics becomes um, something, just simplicity without the complexity, or whatever we want to say. And so I think there's a real time of courage for leaders across every sector of society to recognize how much this new generation wants to contribute and wants to grapple with those deep questions, and how much, when you can talk about these things in the space of a podcast or over a meal or in the context of a business environment, people can be really highly motivated to pursue that kind of change in the world.
Liam's going to ask you the the closing question to get some closing comment from you, but I just want to dig into when you were speaking about the great PR and comms leaders of our day. Who specifically were you thinking of in your mind?
They're all in the States, yeah. So I can't think of
And
any.
no, but there, when if you're to think globally about the great,
Hmm.
maybe like Scott, I don't know, Scottish, or is there
I
any?
There's no one coming to mind.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Liam, you have
Yeah.
the last question.
Subtle transition from trying to shoehorn Scotland into the conversation. David, I just wanted to finish by just reading a direct quote from you, so I hope I get it right. But I just wanted to just know your thoughts off the back of this. You've said quite recently, and you've mentioned it, touched upon it already, young people are looking for a way through the toughest things that we face as human beings, be that war, conflict, health, job loss, mental health. We need to give people the tools to take the venom out of that. And I thought that was really powerful, very profound, and just wanted to give you the final word really on how much an opportunity you see in the faith charity space for organizations to do just that through their communications, through their values, to actually stand up against what's going on in culture and say, do you know what? We're going to be that antidote. We're going to be the people that can help you to, as you've said, there are so many things that Gen Z want to get involved in. We can be the people you get behind, the ambassadors to fuel your passion. What is the opportunity there? Just encourage charity comms professionals as we finish.
Well, I think you said some really key ideas there, just even in the lead up to that question, which is this is a really exciting, challenging time for any kind of leadership, but especially for comms and for PR and for research. And I think back to about 4 years ago when the pandemic began, and it was a tough time for so many of us for lots of reasons. But what was fun for me was like, wow, all this research and experience of looking at what do people think about topics and issues, or how do they practice their faith. We had this real-time laboratory experiment called COVID-19 that allowed for us to, sort of like, oh, wow, look how much things are changing in terms of church attendance or social attitudes or political behavior and perspectives. And so I think we're in this really fun kind of laboratory where we get these opportunities now to sort of test and see and experiment. And again, it's going to be shaping who we are as leaders as much as it is about just the results. Although obviously we do care about getting good results for our partners and our clients, but really helping people to come to better language. I think there's another, we didn't talk at all about this, but like another example of the technology, entertainment, and design world that we're living in is that younger people, and there's always a reinvention of language and what words mean and how they get used. And that is accelerating. That's, again, always been the case, but it's accelerating. I was listening to a really interesting podcast about sort of the language of Gen Z, and how each year there's a new word. And again, that's not new, but it's a really cool moment for us to think about the words we're using to describe the same reality, the benefits of these institutions like households or businesses or government, or the church or faith. I mean, there's a real case to be made for faith in our world today. There's a real case to be made for the value of good government. There's a real case to be made for the value of good business. And and then really recognizing that we're trying to help people live in healthier, more fulfilling communities and lives. Jesus, as a Christian, Jesus talks about giving people life and life to the full, and abundant life. John 10:10 is the reference. I've come, to give people life and life to the full. So I think we're all trying to pursue this vision of a flourishing life, and comms and PR looks at the face of the challenges, like the great movies, the great stories, the great human adventures. They're not without problems or suffering or darkness or challenges. There's this redemption, right? And it's like, I think this generation is looking for organizations and leaders who can stare squarely at those dark areas of our human experience, and then actually redeem it and say, I know you felt this, but here's an even better story. Here's an even better way of understanding what God's calling you to. And so those are just a few thoughts. But what a great interview! What a great time to be with you guys. There weren't enough references to kilts, and
Gareth tried his best. He tried his best,
and as one of the great kind of PR leaders of the modern day, I know it's been a real pleasure to have you on this podcast. And we know you're a busy man, David, but we really appreciate your time. You're always so full of wisdom, so full of insight. And I know that there are so many organizations who use what you're doing, and it's made them better at what they do. So thank you for what you're doing to serve us, to serve the kingdom, and to serve so many ministries across the world.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. Well, it's good to be with you, Liam. Good to see you, Gareth.
Thank you very much, David. And if you've enjoyed this episode, we would just ask you to go and check out our website, which is jerseyroadpr.com. You can find out about what we're all about and our services, and you can also follow us across our social media channels.